All right, folks, I have some tips here to help you maximize your Zephrys plays so that you really can find the perfect card more often than not.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
So my first tip here is to line up your mana. When you play Zephrys, a large part of the decision making for which cards you're going to be offered is based on how much mana you have remaining. So for instance, just starting your turn with a Zephrys is usually not the best play unless you're, say, looking for exactly an 8 mana option starting at 10 mana. But if you can coax Zephrys down a line, say you've got 5 mana left because you want to hit exactly a Brawl, maybe Zephrys can do that, right? If you want to hit Fireball, giving him 4 mana left could help you find that Fireball. Or, you know, if you need that Twisting Nether or Tyrion, putting him with 8 mana left is just fine too. And sometimes if you're looking for something next turn, making sure he's at 0 mana can help you achieve that as well. So don't just hope for the best, but build conditions and scenarios using your remaining mana to coax Zephrys down the right path. Now, that's not always going to be an option depending on what's in your hand, but as much as you can, you should be looking for those opportunities to line things up in a favorable fashion. Next up is to set up lethal before playing your Zephrys. In other words, if you have some damage in hand, say you're sitting on a Fireball, your opponent's at 12, you don't play Zephrys first and hope that he gives you another Fireball. You throw the Fireball, then you play Zephrys, then he's going to give you a Fireball because he's going to say, oh, the opponent only has 6 health. But Zephrys can't see the contents of your hand. He knows how many cards you have, but he doesn't know which cards they are, and he's certainly not calculating the damage potential. So if you're looking to set up a lethal, put all that damage to the opponent's face first to teach Zephrys that, hey, look, there are some lethal spots here. Now, that can change a little bit with things like Bloodlust, for instance. Like, you don't want to attack with your minions first if you're looking for a Bloodlust, but Zephrys is pretty good at figuring out when you have a wide board of minions, so that shouldn't be a problem. But again, if there's like a taunt in the way, maybe you should remove the taunt with your removal spell first and then attack, as opposed to just playing Zephrys down and hoping that he still figures it out. So make sure that if Zephrys is there to give you a lethal, you can do that, set it up first, then follow up with Zephrys, not the other way around. So this tip is to know your key cards for Zephrys. And what that means is there are a handful of things that pop up pretty often in the Zephrys pool because either their conditions are regularly met or Zephrys just considers them really good cards. You might see a lot of Tyrions, Bright Wings, Twisting Nethers, so on and so forth. And if you know the sorts of cards Zephrys is going to give you on average, you can really start to define your game plan around those. I can get a big threatening Tyrion, that would be nice. I can rely on a Twisting Nether later to swing my opponent's board back. If you know what the key cards are, you can plan your turns in some really nice ways. So go through each significant mana breakpoint for Zephrys and start thinking about, okay, what are the best cards at this mana cost? What are the good 2 mana cards, 3 mana cards, 4 mana cards, 5 mana cards? Basically, it means like learn the classic and basic set cards really, really well. That's going to help you make good decisions. Now, I will say Kripparrian already put out a great video walking through some of the key Zephrys cards and mana breakpoints. Go look for that video on his channel. It'll cover it in even more detail here. You can always just do your own research too. It'll help you a lot regardless, just to know all the different classic and basic cards out there. But if you do, you'll have so much better control over your Zephrys. You can really fine tune when to play it and know exactly what you can use to answer certain things or set up certain things. It'll make you a much better Zephrys player. So the next tip here is to know Zephrys's limits. So first and foremost, he doesn't know anything that's not publicly viewable in the game. So he doesn't know, for instance, what cards are in your hand. He also does not know the card text of minions outside of a few very specifically coded interactions. So he's not good at determining effects on board. Like, for instance, he didn't used to know Doomsayer, although he was taught Doomsayer's effect. He's really typically looking at things like stats on board or keywords on board, not intricate text strings. So he's not going to react to some of those things that you might expect. And then, of course, if you didn't know, he is only limited to the classic and basic set. So you're not going to find cards that are from new expansions. That's a limitation. Finally, beyond that, there are actually some cards that aren't available to Zephrys, despite that things like bounce effects like Shadow Step and Youthful Brewmaster, so don't expect those either. So if you figure out what you can't do with Zephrys, that'll often tell you when you should play it and when you shouldn't. If you're looking for something that's just not possible, then don't play your Zephrys. If you're trying to find things that can't happen, you're going to end up with some spots that backfire pretty big. So my next tip for Zephrys here is that it's okay to play him early in the game. I see a lot of people who are only willing to play their Zephrys like on turn 10 to hit the big crazy thing. They're trying to make an absolute all-star Hail Mary kind of play, but I've won a lot of games just by playing Zephrys on turn 2. Grab that backstab on turn 2, win the early board, stop that priest from, building a big minion, following it up with extra arms and healing, and that might just be enough to get you there. So yeah, turn 2 Zephrys into a backstab can be a game-winning sort of play. A turn 3 Zephrys that finds you a 4-drop to keep up the pressure or just have answers to your opponent's stuff on board can be a really valuable sort of thing too. So don't feel like you always have to hit home runs with Zephrys. Sometimes good enough is good enough in Hearthstone, particularly earlier in the game. Bigger plays matter more because they tend to have those snowball style effects. So yeah, playing your Zephrys early is totally fine. Of course, know your matchups, know your scenarios, know what you need. Not every deck or matchup is going to require you to play Zephrys early, but sometimes it'll go a very, very long way. And then my final tip here is that you can also play Zephrys for the next turn. You don't have to play him for this turn. It's usually pretty good because he does fill in exactly what you need often. But if you have, a Pyroblast set up for next turn, play Zephrys at 0 mana and look for that Pyroblast to find a lethal. That can be pretty good. Or if you're just not expecting to have anything to do next turn, but you want a bigger threat, or you just want to have more flexibility for your next top deck, play the Zephrys now, see what's there. You might get a mid-range card that allows you to play something else next turn with it, whereas if you played Zephrys, you wouldn't be able to do that next turn, right? You might have that 2-mana commitment, and you wouldn't be able to slot in a couple extra cards. Not to mention, he is still just a body on board, which can help you take trades, can help you create some pressure against your opponent with face damage occasionally, too. So it's totally fine to play him now for that future setup. Now, it can backfire pretty hard because you don't always know what you're going to need based on what your opponent does. So don't always do this. Sometimes it's better to be reactive than proactive with your Zephrys. But nonetheless, there are a handful of scenarios, handful of matchups where just playing him for the future makes a ton of sense. And there you go, folks. Those are my tips for Zephrys. Of course, if you're a longtime Zephrys player, you probably didn't find these all that helpful. You've probably learned a lot of this on your own. But if you're still learning the card, still figuring out how to optimize it, I hope these sorts of thought exercises will make sure you're doing the right things more often than not. That said, if you have some tips for Zephrys, whether they're more granular or perhaps even broader, leave those in the comments below to help everybody out. But until then, thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, game on.